My mother grabbed the microphone at my sister's wedding and said in front of 200 guests, "Let's all pray for my daughter Lauren, 40, and still no man wants her." 200 people laughed. Not all of them. Some covered their mouths. Some stared at their plates. A woman at table 6, I later found out she was a cousin of the groom, whispered, "Oh my God," to no one in particular, but enough people laughed. Enough to fill a ballroom. Enough to make the sound bounce off the chandeliers and settle somewhere between my ribs. I was sitting at table 9, near the kitchen doors. If you've ever been to a wedding and noticed the table closest to where the waitstaff comes, in and out carrying dirty plates, that's table 9. That's where my mother put me. Between a great uncle of the groom who was already asleep and a college friend of someone who kept checking her phone under the table like she was timing her escape. The Langham Grand Ballroom, downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers. White orchid centerpieces that probably cost more per table than my first month's rent out of college. My sister Chloe, the bride, the beautiful one, the one whose wedding this was supposed to be, had her hand over her mouth at the head table. Not horror exactly, more like embarrassment. The kind you feel when someone else is doing something awful and you're related to them but not enough to stop it. Her new husband Ryan put his hand on her shoulder. He was a good man. He had the decency to not laugh. My mother stood at the front of the ballroom in a champagne-colored dress that was close enough to white to make a statement. She held that microphone like she'd been rehearsing this moment for 40 years. And maybe she had. Here is what 200 people did not know about the woman at table 9. They did not know that I managed a $2, $3 billion division at Archer and Weston, one of the largest consulting firms in the country. They did not know I oversaw 4,000 employees across 12 countries. They did not know that 46 hours before my sister's wedding, the board of directors had voted unanimously to make me Chief Operating Officer, the youngest in the company's history. They did not know any of this because I had never told them. I had never told anyone in that room. Not my mother, not my sister, not the aunt sitting next to me who was gripping my hand under the table so hard I could feel her rings cutting into my skin. My mother paused for comedic timing. She actually paused. Like this was a set she'd been working on. "I sometimes wonder where I went wrong with that one," she continued. The mic popped on the W in wrong. But God knows she needs divine intervention at this point. More laughter. Looser now. People had decided it was okay to laugh because my mother was laughing and the bride was half smiling, and nobody at table 9 had burst into tears, so it must be fine. That's how these things work. If the target doesn't bleed, it must not hurt. A waiter paused behind my chair, holding a tray of champagne flutes. He heard the whole thing. He looked at me the way you look at a car stalled on the highway, brief pity, then keep moving. He moved on. I looked down at my sparkling water. The bubbles were still rising. Tiny, patient, going nowhere but up. I looked at my Aunt Patricia sitting next to me. She was 68 years old and she had tears running down the sides of her face. Not dramatically, just leaking, like something too full had finally cracked. Patricia had spent 30 years being the other woman my mother enjoyed diminishing. First, it was her cooking, then her weight, then her husband, then everything. She was my preview, my coming attraction, the woman I'd become if I sat at table 9 for another 30 years and called it keeping the peace. Patricia squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her grip said, "Don't become me." I put my glass down. I stood up. 200 heads turned. The silence that followed wasn't the dramatic kind you see in movies. It was worse. It was the curious kind. The kind that happens when a car accident is forming and people slow down to watch. The navy dress I was wearing cost $80 from Nordstrom Rack. No jewelry except my father's old Timex on my left wrist. The one he wore to every one of my science fairs, every school play my mother skipped, every Tuesday night when he'd drive 40 minutes from Naperville to take me to dinner, because he knew I needed one person in this family who showed up without conditions. Dad died 6 years ago. Heart attack. Quick. He didn't suffer, which is what people say when they don't know what else to say. I kept the watch. I kept it because when I look at it, I hear his voice. You're not the difficult one, Lauren. You're just the one who asks the right questions. I smoothed my dress. I looked at my mother across the ballroom. She was still smiling. The mic was still in her hand. 200 faces were still turned toward me, waiting for the punchline. I gave them one. Actually, Mom. My voice came out the way it comes out in boardrooms. Steady. Unhurried. The kind of calm that makes people lean forward because they know whatever comes next was chosen carefully. He's already here. The ballroom doors opened, and my mother, the woman who had just told 200 people that no man would ever want me, dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud that the speakers amplified into something that sounded almost like a heartbeat. One loud, final beat. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because if I tell you the ending without the beginning, you'll think this was revenge. It wasn't. Revenge requires planning and bitterness, and I had neither. What I had was 40 years of silence, a corner office on the 47th floor of a building my mother has never visited, and a phone that buzzed in my clutch at exactly the right moment. Let me take you back, because you need to understand how a woman who runs a $3 billion operation for a Fortune 500 company ended up sitting at table 9 at her own sister's wedding, wearing an $80 dress, pretending to be nobody. You need to understand how I got so good at disappearing that I almost couldn't find myself. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, 40 minutes west of Chicago if traffic cooperates, which in Illinois it never does. 2-story house on Elmwood Lane. White siding. Blue shutters. A lawn my father mowed every Saturday morning while listening to the Cubs on a transistor radio he refused to replace. From the outside, the Mitchell house looked like every other house on that street. And maybe that was the point. My mother believed deeply in looking like every other house on the street. Diane Mitchell, Nee Crawford, kindergarten teacher at Jefferson Elementary for 22 years. If you grew up in Naperville in the 80s or 90s, there's a decent chance my mother taught you to tie your shoes and share your crayons. Parents loved her. The PTA loved her. She brought homemade sugar cookies to every bake sale and remembered every child's birthday, and once organized a fundraiser that raised $11,000 for the school library. Everyone's favorite Mrs. Mitchell. At home, she was a different kind of teacher. The curriculum was simpler. There were 2 students, and the grading curve was fixed. Chloe was the A+. I was the incomplete. It wasn't dramatic. That's what people don't understand about this kind of thing. There were no screaming matches, no locked doors, no bruises anyone could point to. It was quieter than that, surgical, the kind of cuts that don't bleed on the outside, so you spend years wondering if the wound is even real. Chloe's drawings went on the refrigerator. Mine went in a drawer. Chloe's ballet recitals, both parents in the front row, my mother recording on a camcorder she bought specifically for Chloe's performances. My science fair's dad in the back row, alone, giving me a thumbs up that meant everything and not enough at the same time. When company came over, my mother would introduce us the same way every time. This is Chloe, my baby girl, she'd say, her hand on Chloe's hair like she was presenting a ribbon she'd won. And this is Lauren. No qualifier, no adjective, just my name, hanging there like a sentence that never got finished. My father noticed. Of course he did. Frank Mitchell was a quiet man, an insurance adjuster who spent his days calculating risk and his evenings trying to reduce it at home. He never confronted my mother directly. That wasn't how he operated. Instead, he compensated. Quietly. Consistently. In ways my mother either didn't notice or chose to ignore. He drove me to every science fair. He left post-it notes in my lunchbox. Not smiley faces or hearts like some parents. Facts. He'd write things like, "Did you know octopuses have 3 hearts?" Or, "The human brain uses 20% of the body's energy. Yours probably uses more." I kept every single one. I have them in a shoebox in my closet in Chicago. 40 years old and I still can't throw them away. But there was one afternoon that rearranged everything. I was 14. October. The leaves on Elmwood Lane had turned that burnt orange color that looks beautiful in photographs, but just means everything is dying. I came home from school early. Academic decathlon practice had been canceled, our coach had the flu. I was carrying my report card in my backpack. Straight A's, again. I had this idea that if I showed Mom the grades and she saw them first, before Chloe got home, maybe she'd say something. Not a parade. Just something. I came in through the back door, dropped my bag in the kitchen, heard voices on the front porch. My mother and Mrs. Calloway from 3 doors down. Iced tea. The good glasses, which meant my mother was performing, because she only brought out the good glasses when she wanted to impress someone, even if that someone was just Barb Calloway with her cat hair sweaters and her opinions about everyone's business. I stopped in the hallway. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was just reaching for the porch door when I heard my name. "Chloe's my pretty one," my mother was saying. Her voice had that warm, confiding tone she used when she was sharing something she wanted to sound reluctant about, but actually couldn't wait to say. "She'll have boys lined up around the block. Mark my words." Mrs. Calloway murmured something I couldn't catch. "Lauren?" My mother laughed. Short. The kind of laugh that has a floor but no ceiling. "Well, at least she's smart. But smart doesn't get you a husband, does it? Smart doesn't keep a man warm at night." They both laughed. The iced tea glasses clinked. I was standing in the hallway holding the strap of my backpack. The report card was inside. All A's. 4.0. The paper might as well have been blank. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. Something worse happened. Something clicked shut. Like a door closing in a house you didn't know had rooms. I walked upstairs. I took the report card out of my backpack. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, the one only I ever looked at, and I never showed my mother a grade again. That was the day I started disappearing. Not physically. I was still there at dinner. Still there at Christmas. Still there in the family photos where my mother would position Chloe in front and me slightly to the side, like a prop that came with the set. But something essential had pulled back behind a wall. I stopped bringing my victories home. I stopped bringing anything home that could be weighed and found wanting. My mother never noticed the shift. Why would she? You don't notice the absence of something you never paid attention to in the first place. My father noticed. He didn't say anything about it for 3 years. Then one night, driving home from a Tuesday dinner, he said, "You know you don't have to earn your place in this family, right? You already have one?" I said, "I know, Dad." I didn't know. I was 17, and I already believed, down in the marrow of me, that love was a performance review and I was never going to get a passing grade. There's one more thing from that time I need to tell you about. Thanksgiving. That same year. The whole family at our house. Turkey, green bean casserole. My mother directing traffic in the kitchen like she was conducting a symphony, and everyone else was slightly out of tune. I had escaped to the guest room upstairs. I was reading. I was always reading. My Aunt Patricia found me there. She knocked twice. She always knocked twice, soft, like she was asking permission to exist, and sat on the edge of the bed. Patricia was my father's older sister. 68 now, but that year she was 54, and she looked like a woman who had been apologizing her whole life. She had the same posture I was developing, shoulders slightly curled, taking up less space than she was entitled to. "Your mother giving you a hard time?" she asked. "No more than usual." Patricia smiled. Sad. The kind of smile that knows the answer before the question. "You know what I regret most, sweetheart?" She was picking at a thread on the quilt. "Not looking at me. Not that people didn't see me. It's that I helped them not see me. I got so good at disappearing that one day I looked in the mirror and I couldn't find myself either. I was 14. I didn't understand. I would. 26 years later, standing in a bathroom at the Langham Hotel in downtown Chicago, I would understand that sentence so completely it would crack me open like an egg. But that's later. First, I need to tell you about the empire I built while nobody was watching. Have you ever hidden something you were proud of, just because showing it felt too dangerous? Yeah, me too. For 26 years. I left for Northwestern the August after I turned 18. Packed 2 suitcases and a box of books into my father's Buick while my mother stood on the porch and said, "Don't forget to call on Sundays." She said it the same way she said everything to me, like a task she was checking off a list, rather than a feeling she couldn't contain. My father drove me the 40 minutes to Evanston in near silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that happens between 2 people who understand each other well enough to know that words would just get in the way. When he pulled up to the dorm, he turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a Post-it note. It said, "The average person uses 10% of their potential. You are not average. Go prove it, but only to yourself." I put that Post-it inside my planner. I looked at it every day for 4 years. By graduation, the ink had faded to almost nothing, but I could still read it with my eyes closed. My mother didn't come to my college graduation. Chloe had a dance recital that day. She was 22 and still doing recreational ballet, the kind where everyone gets a trophy and the parents clap like they're at Lincoln Center. My mother chose the recital. My father came alone. He wore his good tie, the navy one with the small white dots, and he took one photograph of me holding my diploma. Summa cum laude. Operations management. I still have that photo in a frame on my desk, at work, right next to a photo of him at my first science fair, same tie, same quiet pride on his face. 2 photos, 22 years apart, same man, same expression. That's what unconditional looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up in the same navy tie. After Northwestern, I could have gone anywhere. 3 firms offered me positions before I'd even finished my thesis. I chose Archer and Weston because they were headquartered in Chicago, because they were the biggest, and because, if I'm being honest, I had something to prove. Not to my mother. I'd given up on that. To the girl standing in the hallway at 14, holding a report card that suddenly meant nothing. I wanted to show her it meant something, even if nobody else would ever see it. The first 5 years were brutal. Management consulting eats people alive, especially women who don't come from money or connections. I worked 16-hour days. I learned to read a profit and loss statement the way my father read insurance claims, looking for the one number that didn't belong, the one line that told a different story than the rest of the page. I was good at it. Not good for a woman good. Not good for someone her age good. Good. By 30, I was a senior manager. By 33, a director. I restructured the Southeast Asia division during a supply chain crisis that had 3 other firms pulling out of the region entirely. We stayed. We didn't just stay. We grew market share by 14% in 18 months. The CEO at the time sent me a handwritten note. "You just saved us $340 million. I owe you a steak dinner." I never got the steak dinner. I got something better. I got noticed by the man who replaced that CEO 2 years later. David Harrington became CEO of Archer and Weston when I was 32. He was 44 at the time, young for a Fortune 500 chief executive, divorced, 2 sons in boarding school, and the kind of leader who remembered the names of the janitors on every floor. I didn't meet him formally until a board presentation 6 months into his tenure. I was presenting the quarterly operations report for my division. 36 slides. 22 minutes. When I finished, the boardroom was quiet for about 4 seconds, which, in a room full of people who bill by the hour, is an eternity. David said, "Who is she?" The CFO said, "Lauren Mitchell. She runs Southeast Asia Op." David said, "Why doesn't she run more?" Within a year, I was VP of Operations. 12 countries, 4,000 employees, a $2.3 billion portfolio. Corner office on the 47th floor with a view of Lake Michigan that I never got tired of, even on the gray days, especially on the gray days, because gray days in Chicago have a quality of light that makes everything look like it's thinking. David became my mentor. Not in the corporate brochure sense of the word, where someone takes you to lunch twice a year and gives you vague advice about leaning in. In the real sense, he gave me the hard projects. He told me when I was wrong. He defended me in rooms I wasn't invited into yet. And once, after I'd pulled a 40-hour stretch to save a client relationship that everyone else had written off, he sat across from me in his office and said something no one in my family had ever said. "Lauren, you're the best operator I've ever worked with. Why does nobody in your life seem to know that?" I gave him the answer I'd rehearsed. I keep work and family separate. He leaned back in his chair. David had this way of going quiet that made you feel like you just handed him a puzzle he was going to solve whether you wanted him to or not. "That's not separation," he said. "That's hiding." I didn't respond. What was I going to say? He was right. I knew he was right. But being right and being ready to do something about it are two different zip codes, and I had been living in the wrong one for a very long time. Here's what my family knew about my career. Lauren works at a consulting company downtown. Some kind of manager. Makes decent money, probably, because she has a nice enough apartment, but nothing extravagant. She drives a Honda Accord, not even a new one. She doesn't talk about work much. She doesn't talk about much at all, really. Here's what they didn't know. The Honda Accord was a choice, not a limitation. My salary was $340,000 base, plus bonus. I could have driven a Porsche. I chose not to, the same way I chose a condo in Lincoln Park instead of a penthouse in the Gold Coast. The same way I chose quiet restaurants over galas. Not because I was ashamed of the money, because every time I'd shared a milestone with my mother, she'd found a way to make it smaller. When I got promoted to director, I made the mistake of mentioning it at a family dinner. My mother's response, "All that success and still eating dinner alone? Doesn't that bother you?" When I bought my first condo, I sent Chloe a photo. Chloe showed Mom. Mom's response, "A condo for one person. That's just a fancy word for lonely, isn't it?" When I won the Women in Operations Leadership Award, an industry honor that came with a crystal plaque and a feature in a national trade magazine, I brought it up at Christmas. My mother didn't acknowledge it. She spent 3 hours talking about Chloe's engagement to Ryan, the details of the ring, the venue options, the guest list. My award sat in my bag like a stone I'd carried for nothing. So I stopped carrying things home. I stopped mentioning promotions, raises, awards, any of it. The family version of Lauren became a simplified sketch. The single one, the quiet one, the one who works too much and doesn't have a life. And the real Lauren, the one who ran 12 countries and 4,000 people, and stayed up until 2 in the morning solving problems that affected quarterly earnings reports, read by shareholders in 14 time zones that Lauren existed only inside the walls of a glass office building downtown. 2 people separated by 45 minutes of highway. Same woman, same name, completely different lives. David asked me once why I never brought anyone from my family to company events. Other executives brought spouses, parents, siblings. I always came alone. "My family isn't really the corporate event type," I said. David looked at me with that quiet patience that made him a good CEO and an uncomfortable person to lie to. "Lauren," he said, "I've watched you negotiate a $400 million contract without blinking. You're not afraid of corporate events. You're afraid of what happens when those two worlds touch." I changed the subject. He let me. That was the thing about David. He planted the seed and then walked away. He never watered it for you. He trusted you to do that yourself. He was right, of course. I was terrified of what would happen if the two versions of me collided. Not because I was ashamed of either one, because I'd spent 20 years building a wall between them, and I didn't know who I'd be if the wall came down. I was about to find out. Chloe got engaged on a Saturday in April. Ryan proposed at Millennium Park, down on one knee next to the bean, which is exactly the kind of proposal my sister would love: public, photogenic, and immediately shareable. She posted it on Instagram before she called anyone. 300 likes in 20 minutes. My mother found out from a notification on her phone. By the time the family dinner happened 2 days later at my mother's house in Naperville, naturally, because important things happened at my mother's house, or they didn't happen at all, Diane Mitchell had already called 3 venues, 2 florists, and a photographer she'd seen at a neighbor's daughter's wedding. "I've been waiting for this since the day you were born," she said to Chloe, across the dinner table, gripping both of Chloe's hands like she was accepting an award. Her eyes were wet. The performance had already begun. Ryan sat next to Chloe, looking slightly overwhelmed, the way men look when they realize they haven't just proposed to a woman, they've proposed to a family. His parents, the Prescotts, were paying for most of the wedding, upper middle class people from Winnetka. His father ran a commercial real estate firm. His mother, Sandra, was a retired school principal. Good people, polite, the kind of polite that comes from actually respecting other humans, not the kind that comes from wanting them to think you do. None of that stopped my mother from taking over. Within a week, the wedding had become Diane Mitchell's event. She picked the venue, the Langham, downtown, because she wanted something that would impress people. She picked the color scheme. She picked the napkin fold. Ryan's parents were writing the checks and my mother was spending them like she'd earned every cent. I offered to help with the budget early on. I could have covered the entire wedding without noticing the withdrawal, but I wasn't about to announce that. So I pulled Chloe aside after dinner one night and wrote her a check for $15,000. "For whatever you need," I said. "Flowers, band upgrade, whatever." Chloe looked at the check and then looked at me. Something flickered across her face, not quite guilt, not quite gratitude, something in between that she didn't want to examine too closely. "Don't tell Mom," she said. "She'll make it weird." "I know." Chloe tucked the check into her purse. She didn't say thank you. Not then. I told myself it was because she was overwhelmed with planning. That was easier than the alternative. 3 months before the wedding, my mother sent the seating chart to Chloe for approval. Chloe forwarded it to me in a group text with 4 bridesmaids and the words, "Mom's draft thoughts?" I scrolled to my name. Table 9. If you pulled up the floor plan of the Langham Ballroom, Table 9 was in the back left corner, approximately 6 feet from the swinging doors to the service kitchen. The tables around it were filled with Ryan's great-aunts, some of his father's golf friends, and a handful of people who'd been invited out of obligation rather than affection. It was the table where you put people you technically had to include but didn't particularly want anyone to notice. I called Chloe. "Table 9?" I said. Not angry, just clarifying. "Mom said the head tables are for couples. Since you're not bringing a date." She trailed off. I could hear her choosing her next words like someone stepping around broken glass. "It's not personal, Lauren. Everything my mother did to me was personal. That was the whole point." But I wasn't going to argue about a seating chart. I had managed seating arrangements for international delegations of 40 people with competing egos and nuclear weapons budgets. I could handle Table 9. "Fine," I said. "You could bring someone, you know. A friend, a coworker, anyone. I could have brought David. I could have brought any of a dozen people who would have come without question." But the lie had its own logic. And the logic said, don't give her anything she can use. Don't show her anything she can turn into a weapon. Sit at Table 9 and be invisible, because invisible is safe. "I'll be fine," I said. And I hung up. Aunt Patricia texted me that evening. "I'm also at Table 9. At least we'll have each other," followed by a smiley face that felt more like a white flag than an emoji. The rehearsal dinner was held the Friday before the wedding, at a steakhouse in the West Loop that Ryan's father had booked. 30 people. Immediate family. Wedding party. A few close friends. My mother wore a silk blouse she'd bought specifically for the occasion, and a string of pearls she told everyone were a gift from my father, which they were a 20th anniversary present he'd saved for 3 months to buy. She wore them like a costume piece now. A prop for the character she was playing. Devoted widow, selfless mother, matriarch of a picture-perfect family. During introductions, she took Ryan's parents by the arm, one on each side, like they were her escorts, and walked them around the room. "This is my baby, Chloe. You already know her, of course. And this is her future husband, Ryan, the most wonderful young man." She glowed. She radiated. She was the sun, and everyone else was supposed to orbit. Then she got to me. "And this is my other daughter, Lauren, the career girl." She said, "Career girl, the way you might say hobbyist or enthusiast, something a person does instead of something real. Still single. 40 next month. Maybe one of your nephews is available?" She laughed. Ryan's parents half smiled. The room made that sound a room makes when something awkward happens, but nobody wants to be the one to name it. I smiled. I said nothing. That was the arrangement. But after dinner, while my mother was in the restroom refreshing her lipstick and her narrative, Sandra Prescott found me by the coat check. She was a small woman with short gray hair and the kind of eyes that suggested she'd spent 30 years watching children and learning to see what they didn't say. "Lauren," she said, quietly, like she'd been waiting for a moment without an audience. "For what it's worth, there's nothing wrong with building something for yourself before you build it with someone else. Some of us wish we'd done it that way." I looked at her, this woman I'd met 3 times. This stranger who had just said more to me in 2 sentences than my mother had said in 40 years. "Thank you," I said, and my voice did something it hadn't done in a long time. It cracked, just barely. A hairline fracture that I sealed back up before anyone else could hear it. Sandra patted my arm and walked away. That was it. No speech. No drama. Just one woman telling another, "I see you. You're not what she says you are." I drove back to my mother's house that night because I was staying in my old bedroom for the wedding weekend. Chloe was at the hotel with her bridesmaids. My mother was already asleep, or pretending to be. She'd had 3 glasses of Chardonnay at dinner and tended to confuse unconsciousness with an early bedtime. I lay on the narrow twin bed I'd slept in until I was 18. The room still smelled like old books and the lavender sachets my mother put in all the closets. The ceiling still had the glow-in-the-dark stars my father had stuck up there when I was 8. Most of them had stopped glowing years ago. 3 still held a faint green light, dim enough that you'd miss them if you weren't looking. I was looking. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up. "David Harrington, 10:47 p.m. Board voted this afternoon. Unanimous. You're our new COO, effective Monday. I need your signature on the appointment papers before the press release goes out. I'm at the Lake Geneva retreat this weekend. Where are you tomorrow? I'll drive down." I read the text 3 times. COO, Chief Operating Officer. The position I had spent 8 years working toward without ever saying it out loud, because saying things out loud in my family meant handing someone a knife and showing them where to cut. I looked up at the 3 remaining stars on the ceiling. Green. Fading. Still there. I typed back. "I'll be at the Langham downtown. My sister's wedding. David, I'll find you. Expect me around 7:30. Congratulations, Lauren. You earned this a long time ago." I put the phone down. I stared at the ceiling. In 12 hours, I would be sitting at table 9 inches in $80 dress, and the man who ran one of the largest consulting firms in the country would be driving 90 minutes to hand me a title that most executives spend their entire careers chasing. And my mother, the woman sleeping 1 wall away from me, the woman who had spent 40 years telling me I wasn't enough, would have no idea. At what point does keeping the peace become betraying yourself? I didn't know the answer yet, but I was about to learn it in front of 200 people. I got ready alone, not by accident, by architecture. My mother had reserved the bridal suite at the Langham for Chloe and her 4 bridesmaids, none of whom were me. I was not asked to be in the wedding party. Chloe said it was because she wanted to keep the numbers even, and Ryan only had 4 groomsmen. I said I understood. I did understand. I'd been understanding things like this for 40 years. My hotel room was on the 9th floor. Standard king. Nice enough. I'd booked it myself, paid for it myself, and would leave it tomorrow morning without anyone in my family knowing the room number or asking about checkout. I showered. I dried my hair. I put on the navy dress, the $80 one from Nordstrom Rack, that fit like it had been made for me, which is the kind of luck you get when you've spent your whole life not drawing attention to yourself. You learn what works quietly. I clasped my father's Timex around my left wrist. The leather band was cracking at the edges. I should have replaced it years ago. I never would. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Not a long look. Just the functional kind, checking for lipstick on my teeth. A wrinkle in the fabric. The kind of look that takes inventory without asking questions. My phone sat on the marble counter. One text from David, sent at 6:14 a.m. On the road. Should be there by 7:30 tonight. Don't sign anything until I get there. I want to hand you the pen myself. I smiled at that. David had a sense of ceremony that he disguised as practicality. He wasn't driving 90 minutes because a signature couldn't wait. He was driving because he believed certain moments deserved to happen in person. I respected that. I respected him. In another life, in a family that celebrated its own, I would have told my mother about David years ago, not as a romantic interest, but as proof that someone in this world looked at me and saw something worth investing in. But this was not that family, and today was not my day. Today was Chloe's day. I was going to sit at table 9, eat the salmon, clap at the toasts, and sign my COO papers in the lobby like a business transaction. Clean, quiet, invisible. That was the plan. The ceremony was outdoors, in the Langham's Garden Terrace. October in Chicago, which is a gamble you either get golden autumn light or sideways rain. And there's no middle ground. We got the light. It came through the trees at that low afternoon angle that makes everything look like a memory, even while it's happening. I sat in the third row, not the first that was reserved for my mother, who had positioned herself at the center of the aisle-side seat like she was about to receive communion. She wore the champagne dress. She carried a handkerchief she didn't need but held visibly, in case anyone forgot she was the mother of the bride. Chloe looked beautiful. I want to say that clearly, because what happened later doesn't change it. My sister walked down that aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my first car, and she looked like someone stepping into the life she'd always been promised. Her face was open, and certain in a way mine had never been. Not because she was braver, because she'd never had a reason to close it. Ryan stood at the altar and cried when he saw her. Real tears, not performance tears. I could tell the difference. I'd grown up studying the difference. The vows were simple. The minister was brief. When Chloe said I do, I felt something genuine move through my chest, happiness for my sister, tangled up with something heavier that I didn't want to name. Not jealousy. I wasn't jealous of Chloe's wedding, or her husband, or her life. I was jealous of her certainty, the absolute, unquestioned belief that she deserved to be standing there, in the light, being looked at. I had never stood in the light on purpose. Not once. Not even in boardrooms. I stood in competence. I stood in results. But light the kind that has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with simply being seen that I had always stepped away from. Aunt Patricia was sitting next to me. She squeezed my hand during the vows. Her fingers were cold and thin, and her grip was stronger than it looked. We had been sitting next to each other at family events for 30 years, two women on the margins, watching the main characters live their lives from the best seats. After the ceremony, guests moved inside for cocktail hour. The ballroom was being set up for the reception. I excused myself. Told Patricia I needed to use the restroom. I didn't need to use the restroom. I needed to be alone for 3 minutes in a room where nobody was watching me. That was all. Just 3 minutes without arranging my face into something appropriate. 3 minutes without performing the role of the daughter who doesn't mind. The sister who isn't hurt. The woman who has chosen to be alone and is fine with it. Really, honestly, completely fine. The bathroom off the lobby was marble and brass and soft lighting that made everyone look slightly better than they deserved. I locked the door. I put both hands on the counter, I looked at the mirror, not the quick look from this morning, not the inventory look. The real one, the woman looking back at me, was 40 years old. She had her father's eyes and her mother's cheekbones and a jaw that she'd learned to set in a very specific way, slightly forward, slightly lifted, that meant, I am fine. I have been fine my entire life. Do not ask me if I am fine, because the question itself is an insult to how fine I am. She was also the youngest VP in the history of a Fortune 500 company. She managed $2.3 billion across 12 countries. She had 4,000 people who reported to her, directly or indirectly, and as of 46 hours ago, she had been unanimously chosen to be Chief Operating Officer, and she was sitting at table 9, near the kitchen. Between a sleeping great-uncle and a stranger checking her phone, I gripped the counter. Something was happening. Not anger I'd managed, anger my entire career. Not sadness, sadness was familiar enough to be furniture. Something else. Something that felt like the moment before you step off a ledge you've been standing on so long you forgot it was a ledge. Aunt Patricia's voice, from 26 years ago, in a guest room that smelled like lavender. I got so good at disappearing that one day I looked in the mirror and I couldn't find myself either. I looked at the mirror. I found myself. She was right there. She'd been there the whole time, hiding behind a navy dress and a low profile and a Honda Accord and 20 years of strategic silence, hiding because a woman on a porch once said, "Smart doesn't keep a man warm at night," and a 14-year-old decided the safest response was to stop being seen entirely. But the woman in this mirror, the one with her father's watch on her wrist and a COO title, waiting in a leather portfolio in the back seat of someone's car, she wasn't 14 anymore, and the porch was 30 years ago. And the woman who said those words still had power, only because I kept handing it to her, year after year, holiday after holiday, table 9 after table 9. My mother wasn't going to change. She could receive a phone call from the President of the United States congratulating her daughter, and she would find a way to say, "But still no husband." That was who she was. That was who she would always be. The question wasn't whether she would change. The question was whether I would keep building my life around her limitations. I let go of the counter. I straightened my shoulders. Not dramatically, not like a movie scene where the music swells, just a small adjustment, the kind of shift that would be invisible to anyone watching, but I could feel it. Something had unlocked. Not a plan. Not a revenge scheme. Not a speech I was going to give. Just a quiet, bone-deep decision that I was done hiding, done performing, done sitting at tables I didn't choose, in rooms where I was the most capable person and the least visible one. I washed my hands. I dried them on the cloth towel. I walked out of the bathroom and back toward the ballroom. Aunt Patricia was waiting by the entrance, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. She handed me one, looked at my face, tilted her head. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." Patricia studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real one, not the white flag kind, and said, "Good." We walked into the ballroom together, table 9, near the kitchen doors. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting there because I'd agreed to be invisible. I was sitting there because it didn't matter where they put me. Not anymore. The toasts started at 7. Ryan's best man went first, a college roommate named Greg, who told a story about Ryan burning ramen in their dorm kitchen sophomore year. Everybody laughed. Chloe's maid of honor went next, her college friend Brittany. "Not me with a speech about sisterhood and finding your person," she cried at the end. So did half the room. It was a good speech. I clapped. I meant it. Then my mother stood up. She didn't wait to be introduced. She didn't wait for the DJ to hand her the microphone. She walked to the front of the ballroom the way she walked into every room, like she'd been sent for. Like the event had been waiting for her to arrive before it could truly begin. "Since my Frank can't be here tonight," she said, pressing the handkerchief to her eye, "I'll speak for both of us." My father would not have said what she was about to say. My father would have stood at that microphone and told Chloe he was proud of her, and then sat down without mentioning me at all, because that was his way of protecting me by not making me a target. But my father was dead, and my mother had the mic. She started with Chloe. 5 minutes of Chloe's childhood. Ballet recitals. Prom. The time Chloe made her a Mother's Day card entirely out of glitter, and Diane still had it in a drawer. The room was warm with it. People were nodding. Some were misty. My mother was conducting the room like she always did, pulling strings of sentiment until the whole audience leaned the way she wanted them to. Then her eyes found me across the ballroom. I saw the shift. I'd seen it 1,000 times at dinner tables, at holidays, at every family event where the spotlight wasn't enough, and she needed a shadow to make it brighter. Her mouth changed shape. Not a smile and not a frown. Something in between. The expression of a woman about to say something she'd been saving. And I want to take a moment for my other daughter, Lauren. She paused. Let's all pray for her. 40. And still no man wants her. The room reacted the way rooms react to things like this in layers. First, the gasp. A few sharp intakes of breath from people who couldn't believe she'd said it. Then the nervous laughter, which is what people do when they don't know what else to do. Then the real laughter, which came from the people who had decided it was a joke because it was easier than deciding it was cruelty. 200 people, laughing at me. I sometimes wonder where I went wrong with that one, my mother continued, tilting her head like she was genuinely puzzled. But God knows she needs divine intervention at this point. The laughter swelled. My mother smiled into it the way a singer smiles into applause. Here is what I was thinking while 200 people laughed at me. I was thinking about a conference room on the 47th floor of a building 14 miles from this ballroom, where last Tuesday I had negotiated a $400 million contract extension with a client who had been ready to walk. 3 hours. No notes. Just me and a table and a man who ran a sovereign wealth fund and who, at the end of it, shook my hand and said, "I've never met anyone like you." I was thinking about 4,000 people who would open an email Monday morning and learn that their new chief operating officer was a woman named Lauren Mitchell. And most of them would not be surprised because they had watched me work for 8 years and they already knew. I was thinking about my father's watch on my wrist. 7:12 p.m. David would be here in 18 minutes. And I was thinking about the woman in the bathroom mirror, the one who had decided, 45 minutes ago, that she was done disappearing. My Aunt Patricia was sitting next to me. Her hand was on the table, palm up, like an offering. I didn't take it, not because I didn't want to, because if I took her hand, I might soften, and I couldn't afford to soften right now. Right now, I needed the version of me that closed deals, not the version that grieved. I looked at Diane. She was still holding the microphone, still feeding off the room, still performing the role she'd played my entire life. The mother who tried so hard, the mother who worried so much, the mother who just wanted what was best. Bless her heart. She had never wanted what was best for me. She wanted what was best for the story she told about herself. And in that story, I was the cautionary tale. The evidence that even a perfect mother can't save every child. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I opened it beneath the table. David. Pulling up to the hotel now. Where should I meet you? This was the moment. I could text him lobby and we'd sign the papers at a desk by the concierge and I'd go back to table 9 and nobody in this room would ever know. That was the safe choice. The invisible choice? The choice I'd been making for 26 years? I looked at my aunt. At the tears still sliding down her face, at her shoulders curled, small, taking up less space than she deserved. 68 years old and still flinching. I was not going to be 68 and still flinching. I typed one word, ballroom. Then I put my phone away. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. The bubbles were still rising. I drank the last of it, set it down, stood up. The room turned. My mother's smile faltered. This wasn't in her script. The cautionary tale wasn't supposed to stand up. The cautionary tale was supposed to sit at table 9 and absorb it. Actually, Mom, my voice came out exactly the way I needed it to. Boardroom steady. The voice that had talked sovereign wealth funds into 9-figure deals. The voice that 4,000 people followed because it never shook. He's already here. The ballroom doors opened. David Harrington walked into that ballroom the way he walked into every room, like he belonged there, but wasn't interested in proving it. Silver hair, charcoal suit, the kind of posture that comes from running things for so long, you forget what it feels like to ask permission. 200 heads turned. Not because they knew who he was, because he carried himself like someone you should know. He scanned the room, found me, walked directly to table 9 without hesitating, without looking at anyone else, without stopping to read the social temperature of a ballroom that had been laughing at my expense 30 seconds earlier. My mother was still standing at the front, mic in her hand. Her face was cycling through expressions, confusion first, because this wasn't in the script. Then curiosity. Then something that almost looked like hope, because a handsome man in an expensive suit was walking toward her unmarried daughter, and maybe God had answered her prayer faster than expected. David reached my table. He didn't hug me. He didn't kiss my cheek. He extended his hand. "Sorry I'm late, Mitchell," his voice carried. Not because he was projecting, because the room had gone dead quiet and sound travels in silence. Drove from Lake Geneva. Couldn't let this wait until Monday. He opened a leather portfolio he'd been carrying under his arm. Set it on the table. Uncapped a pen. The board voted unanimously last Friday. As of Monday morning, you are the new Chief Operating Officer of Archer & Weston. He placed the pen on top of the document. Congratulations, Lauren. You've earned this a long time ago. The room didn't react immediately. There was a gap 3 seconds, maybe 4, where 200 people tried to recalculate what they were seeing. The woman at table 9, the one they just laughed at, the one whose own mother had called pathetic. Then Ryan's father stood up, Richard Prescott. Commercial real estate. The kind of man who read the Wall Street Journal every morning before breakfast and could spot a Fortune 500 executive at 100 yards. "Archer & Weston?" he said. Not a whisper. A declaration. "Are you David Harrington?" David turned. "I am." My God. Richard looked at me, then at Chloe, then back at me. "Your sister-in-law is the new COO of Archer & Weston?" David didn't correct the in-law part. He just said, "She's been the best operator in our company for 8 years. The board's only regret is that we didn't promote her sooner." The recalculation was instant. You could see it moving through the room like a wave, people leaning to each other. Phones appearing under tables. Someone whispering that's a Fortune 500 company. The woman at table 9 was not what they'd been told. The woman at table 9 was the most accomplished person in this building, and she'd been sitting next to the kitchen doors without saying a word. Uncle Gary started clapping. Slow, deliberate. The way you clap when you've waited a long time to see something put right. Others joined. It built. Not a standing ovation, something quieter than that, but more honest. Recognition that had been 30 years overdue. Aunt Patricia had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. Not grief. Something on the other side of grief. 30 years of watching her niece be diminished, and someone had finally said out loud what Patricia had always known and never had the power to prove. I looked at my mother. Diane was still standing at the front of the ballroom. The microphone was still in her hand, but it had drifted down to her side like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Her face had gone through hope and confusion, and had landed somewhere I'd never seen before. She looked like a woman standing in a house, where all the furniture had been rearranged while she wasn't looking. Everything was familiar, and nothing was where she'd put it. She took a step toward me. Her mouth opened. The recovery was starting. I could see it forming behind her eyes. The narrative she was about to construct. She would say she'd always known. She would say she was so proud. She would find a way to put herself at the center of my success, the way she'd put herself at the center of everything. "Lauren, I always knew you were—" "Don't, Mom." 2 words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She stopped, mid-sentence. Mid-step, the microphone dropped from her hand and hit the floor with a thud that the speakers picked up and amplified into one sharp, final sound. Nobody moved to pick it up. My mother stood there, alone. The champagne dress that had looked like a power move 2 hours ago now looked like something a woman wears when she's trying to be the bride at someone else's wedding. The room had shifted around her, and she was still standing where the center used to be, except the center had moved and nobody had told her. A waiter passed behind her carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "Ma'am? More champagne?" She didn't hear him. He shrugged and kept walking. I picked up David's pen. I signed the appointment letter. My hand was steady. My father's watch read 7:34 p.m. David said, "You should celebrate." I looked at him. "I think I just did." He smiled, shook my hand once more, closed the portfolio, and left the way he'd come without needing to explain himself to anyone. The ballroom doors closed behind him. The room exhaled. The rest of the wedding happened around me like weather. People came to table 9. Not to offer sympathy, to introduce themselves. Cousins I'd seen at holidays for 20 years suddenly wanted to know what I did for a living. Ryan's business school friends materialized with handshakes and cards. A woman from table 3 asked if Archer and Weston was hiring. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" asked a second cousin named Doug, who I was fairly sure had never spoken to me before tonight. "You never asked," I said. Not bitter, just accurate. The kind of truth that doesn't need volume to land. My mother had retreated to her seat at the head table. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, her champagne untouched, staring at a centerpiece like it owed her an explanation. People were orbiting around her without stopping the way you orbit around something that used to be important but has been reclassified. Nobody was being cruel to her. Nobody needed to be. The absence of attention was enough. For a woman who had spent her life arranging rooms around herself, being ignored was the only punishment that fit. Chloe found me near the dessert table. Her mascara had held up, which was the kind of detail my sister would care about even in the middle of a family rearrangement. She stood in front of me in her 3-tier wedding dress, and she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had spent her whole life in the spotlight trying to figure out what to do now that someone had pointed it somewhere else. "You could have told me, Lauren." I looked at my sister, my beautiful, uncomplicated, well-loved sister who had never once been introduced as my other daughter, who had never been placed at a table near the kitchen, who had tucked a $15,000 check into her purse without saying thank you. Because in Chloe's world, being taken care of was simply what happened. "I tried," I said, "for 20 years. You just weren't listening." Chloe opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved behind her eyes, not understanding. Not yet, but the precursor to understanding. The moment before a crack forms. She might get there eventually. She might call me in 3 weeks and say, "I've been thinking about what you said." Or she might not. I couldn't control that. I was done controlling outcomes for people who hadn't earned the effort. "It's your wedding night," I said. "Go dance with your husband. He's a good man." Chloe's eyes filled. She nodded. She turned and walked back toward Ryan, who was waiting on the dance floor with his hand extended and his face full of the kind of uncomplicated love that I hoped, for her sake, would be enough. I found Aunt Patricia by the coat check. She was holding her coat over her arm, the way you hold things when you're not sure if you're leaving or staying. Her eyes were red, but her posture was different. Something had shifted in her, too. Not as dramatically as it had in me, but perceptibly, like a window that had been painted shut for 30 years, had cracked open half an inch. She took my face in both hands. Her fingers were cold and her palms were warm, and she held me like I was something that might disappear if she let go. "You did what I never could," she said. "Thank you. It's not too late for you either, Aunt Pat." She smiled. It was the most complicated thing I'd ever seen on a human face: hope and grief and regret, and something that might have been the first breath of a life she hadn't started living yet. "Maybe," she said, and the way she said it sounded less like doubt and more like a door being tested. I kissed her cheek. I got my coat. I walked out of the Langham Grand Ballroom and into the October night. The parking garage was cold. and quiet, and smelled like concrete and exhaust, and the particular emptiness that comes after you've been in a room full of people, and suddenly you're not. My Honda Accord was on the 3rd level. I unlocked it, sat in the driver's seat. Didn't start the engine. The Chicago skyline was visible through the concrete slats of the garage wall. Glass and steel and light, all of it indifferent to what had just happened in a ballroom 16 floors below. The city didn't care about my mother's toast or my title or the 2 words I'd said that ended a 30-year performance. It just kept going. I found that comforting. I looked at my father's watch. 9:47 p.m. I stopped disappearing, Dad, I whispered. The words fogged in the cold air and vanished. Like they'd been waiting to be said, and now that they had been, they didn't need to exist anymore. My phone sat in the cup holder. No texts from Mom. I didn't expect any. Didn't need any. One text from David. Monday, 8 a.m. Your new office is on 48. Corner suite. You earned it. I started the car. The radio came on mid-song, something I didn't recognize. Something with a piano and a woman's voice singing about driving with the windows down. I didn't change the station. I pulled out of the garage and onto Michigan Avenue, and the city opened up in front of me, the way cities do when you're finally driving toward something instead of away from it. My mother called twice the next week. I didn't answer. Not out of anger. Out of peace. Chloe texted once. Can we talk? I said yes. We'll see. Aunt Patricia enrolled in a community college course the following Monday. 68 years old. She texted me a photo of her student ID. Her hair was messy and her eyes were wide and she looked terrified. She looked alive. If you've been hiding who you are to keep someone comfortable, I want you to know something. The room is smaller than you think. The table they put you at doesn't define you, and the door was never locked.